So, welcome on the Merantix AI Campus, and good morning to all of you, and thanks for coming. It's great to see so many faces, while still a lot of people think it's summer, but obviously everybody is at work and pushing things forward. So are you, and thanks for making time for this. I'm super excited about this topic today. You know, everybody talks about agentic AI, and obviously there's huge potential in all of what's happening right now, but I feel topics like the material world, like the physical world, is still underrepresented when it comes to media attention, because obviously what we're doing here in the materials world is a bit harder to grasp, and so it makes it's harder to write catchy articles about that everybody gets, because it's such a deep topic. So I today will try to use this amazing group of people to shed some more light into what's actually going on. We're going to talk about where we are, where we're heading, but also what's keeping us from succeeding, and what are the things that we still need to overcome. And really excited to have this opportunity to discuss. Quick word about myself. I'm Adrian, co-founder and general partner of Merantix Capital. Merantix Capital is part of the Merantix Group. Merantix Capital is an early stage investor. We do studio incubations, starting companies from scratch with founders, and we also do pre-seed early stage investments in companies in a wide range of industries with a clear AI thesis, and ranges from bio to health to robotics, manufacturing, cybersecurity, fintech, and the list goes on. Basically, our core thesis is we like to invest in the type of business models and companies that wouldn't exist prior to the advent of machine learning AI. I'm gonna let my panelists introduce themselves, and please, when you do so, besides talking about who you are and what you do, also talk quickly about what is it that really excites you about this intersection of machine learning and the material world, materials discovery, and at the same time also where you still see the biggest misconceptions about this industry. Jackie, we're starting with you.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie. I'm engineering lead at Cambrium. Cambrium is a synthetic biology startup, so we make protein-based materials and we manufacture them in cells. I think what makes me most excited about this industry is, I think this proud parent moment, if you've ever worked on a big model and you know about biology and how complex it is and how difficult it is, this moment when you have designed a piece of DNA, piece of functional ingredient, you put it in a cell and actually does what you predicted it would do. This is fantastic. This is new to nature. This is something entirely new. So this is kind of a proud parent moment, I think. I think the biggest misconception is that the hard part is the design. You design a new material, you sort of spec it to a certain function, and then there's all these control elements in the cell. We know what turns this gene on. We know what gets it to the cell to secrete the protein. You just put them in, feed the cell, off you go, out it goes, and it's not as simple as that. It's much more complicated. It's a living organism.
Jonas.
Yeah, hello. I'm Jonas. I'm a founding engineer and another technical staff from Cusp AI. And yeah, we're a startup focusing on building a platform that allows for very rapid material screening and design. So we basically say the process usually takes years or decades, should be shortcutted into months. And yeah, so what makes me excited about this field is exactly that we are really now at a point where we can combine very different tools that existed already and can use them in a cohesive way, using kind of AI as the clue or the superpower to actually unlock all the shortcomings in the different, let's say, scales or the different domains. And that way we can do much more. So 1 + 1 is really more than 2. And yeah, so what it was here is a misunderstanding, I think, especially in the machine learning AI world, especially this, we see a lot of papers, a lot of work in this field. People think, okay, it's just another token problem. You can basically just tokenize your molecule space and then throw your LLM on it, and you get basically all the results that you want. And unfortunately, it's not so easy. It's just that we don't have the data, or that we don't understand the mechanisms already. We just have some ideas. They're good, but they're not deep enough. And so it's really about a fine-grained combination of deep technical expertise in a very specific niche domain combined with this more general AI part that really makes it shine. And I think this is also where it's shine of XP.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm Alex. I'm co-founder, CEO of Dunia Innovations, Berlin-based startup focusing on a similar problem, right? That we want to develop better materials by combining AI with physical systems. Some people call them self-driving labs, some people call them autonomous labs, but essentially really trying to accelerate how we can develop any material with a strong focus on sustainability and energy. What I'm excited about is, I guess, a lot of science fiction is really dependent and bottlenecked by materials, right? So we are maybe not that far away actually from living in this abundant future where we have flying cars and fusion and all of that, but really there's a lot of material challenges we have to tackle first. I think something that's misunderstood, I would say maybe 2 points. One of them, just how big this gap between sort of simulations and reality actually is. I think some people have not fully grasped yet how big this chasm is, and how we have to make this design world really talk with the real world, and what it will take to get there. From our perspective, a lot of data is missing. And the second point is just what is actually material? I think that's super misunderstood. What is a material? And I think the nomenclature around how you bring a material into a product, I think that is really misunderstood and it's frustrating.
We're going to cover all this, and looks like we're well prepared, because I think we're going to talk about how to actually bring science into application, also how to bridge the silos, the academic silos, and how to assemble these teams. We're also going to talk about data. So, Jackie, I think, and I would agree to what you said, right? So it's not just engineering and discovering the right formulas, but then also bring them into production. Yet it might also make it look like easy to get there. So talk to us a bit about the data problem in the beginning, because it still is one of the hurdles to make things go fast, right? The high quality data that you need. So how do you think about it, and also how do you go about it at Cambrium?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I want to say first, without having the tools that we have now, I think we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. I think this should be clear. We are able to do much faster and much more efficient on the design end, so we can produce. If you bring it back to the context of an LLM, we have learned what reasonable sounding words look like, what the language looks like. We've learned some basic rules of grammar. What we are missing, if we bring in this context, is that we have never, maybe there's a couple books in the organization, and that's all you have. It's not like you have this whole corpus of internet to train on, but you really only have a very small glimpse of what this thing that you're actually trying to add to the system looks like in context. So really, it's generating this data to fill in this context is key in order to be able to really understand how this product that you're trying to design will actually be produced in this other environment. So yeah, I think the data ultimately for us will be the differentiating factor in making this platform work.
And how do you acquire it? How do you make sure that you're not just relying on what's publicly available and everybody else can tap into?
I mean, that is many months, weeks, hard work, blood, sweat, and tears in the lab, right? You have to have a lab, you have to have good assays, you have to put in the work to actually understand your system, understand your problems, understand your products, and collect as little as possible, as meaningful as possible data in order to be able to kind of feed that back into your design stack.
And what about industry partnerships? How can they help, and how are they set up in a way that they actually do work and also not only work in a scientific sense, but also in a commercial sense?
That was a really good question. I think the magic word is aligned incentives, right? You have to find the right partner to be able to agree on like a mutually positive outcome for both sides. I think the technology needs to match, right? You want to be able to transfer the information that you learn from such a partnership back into your own system. It can be difficult, so it's possible.
Jonas, we're also going to talk about science, but let's first tap into a more like bodily or human challenge, because you rightly put it out in your intro, right, to crossing this chasm between the different domains and building high-performing teams. And just quick recap. Actually, this was one of the reasons why I started Merantix back 10 years ago when I came back from San Francisco, and I was like, hey, if you want to build machine learning in Europe, actually it's great. We have all the pieces. We have great research, we have great engineers, we have fantastic industry players, we have huge markets, and yet we fail to put these together. And it starts early when you look at the academic setup, academic institutions, how they're built, then they're siloed, right? The machine learning people, the computer science people rarely speak to chemists, rarely speak to biologists, rarely speak to anyone really outside their domain. And that's one of the key differentiators, I would say, when you compare these universities, research environments in the US or also in the UK. So let's come back to the question you started to do about it. How do you build these teams and how do you ascend them, and also how do you make them work together, crossing all the, let's say, cultural or language barriers?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I think this was one of the founding principles at Cusp, actually, that we said if we end up with a classic setup of having, I don't know, like a lab team, a theoretical chemistry team, and a machine learning team, and the machine learners always wait until they get the data to fit the model and send them back, then you'll fail. Because this is literally the playbook of many of these bio startups that existed, where they basically had exactly this kind of split between the scientists and the engineers, and it was like literally like two teams, and in the end you had like a competition between, because scientists say, well, your models are not useful, so why should we even use them? And the engineers were always like, okay, I don't have the data, so I can't track a good model. Yeah, and this is just doomed to fail. And at Cusp, I think, from the beginning, we started to sample people who had some grounding in both fields. So I myself, for example, I'm a machine learning researcher, but I worked for close to 8 years now in this first bio and later material domain. And same with the other early joiners. And then we later, when we continued hiring, we hired many people who were basically crossing these barriers already from their background. And this is just the start. Then it's all about internal teaching. And also, for example, we started having this one job title, member of technical staff, for a reason. And this includes everyone who's a chemist is also a member of the technical staff. So there's just no difference. Because I have to learn a lot of chemistry, I have to learn a lot of material science, but they also have to learn a lot of coding, they have to learn a lot of machine learning. So I believe in 5 years, all of us will just converge to something that is useful for our mission, but not necessarily tied to like a job title. And I think getting there, important part is first of all, really kill the ego. I think this is just something I realized a lot. Like people feel, like machine learners feel, oh, I have to do dirty work if I have to dive into doing boring machine learning on some useful model, or like really understanding an algorithm, really understanding what DFT is actually computing. So it feels like, okay, why should I learn this? I just need the data. And vice versa, for chemists it looks like, okay, I just want to need a model that gives me like this property. I don't care about what's computed, and of course it doesn't work. So it really means like kill your ego, be curious, be open, be compassionate about others to thrive as well, and help them teaching. I think this is kind of the core spirit in our team. Now we grew up to around 30 people, and so far it works really, really well. I feel like it has to be baked from the core. Like you can't introduce this post-hoc after you already have these teams. So this is my strong belief.
I like that a lot. I would subscribe to everything that you said, basically. And I thought what I didn't know was this title hack that he did, and I love it. I think it's amazing, and it's so on paper, on the surface, it's so simple, right? But still, it needs a lot of convincing in the beginning, because when people don't join you for their first job, they come from a world where titles were done in a certain way, and they are now thinking in this way as well. So if you don't reward them with this kind of title, then they'll be like, yeah, but this is humiliating, right? And then also taking this ego out and just bringing people much closer together, actually align them on the mission, right? So it's not about you, but it's about where the company wants to go. And so I mean, it's simple, but it's also hard to do, because we're talking of really amazing people that you're hiring, right? And so low ego does not always come automatically. But it can. I think that's a fundamental thing I believe in. It can be learned, and it can be also trained, as you said. So now, as we're talking about the more cultural aspects of life, also give us an insight into what are the biggest technical challenges you're currently facing. Like, what are the things you're working on where you're like, not sure if we get that to work just now.
Okay, I think let me first talk about the stuff that I know will get to work, but it's a technical challenge, it's a surprising challenge, and it's also something I'd say, the way I'm very optimistic about what we are doing is, it's actually quite not trivial to bring together the established computational frameworks that you have in material discovery and computational chemistry with a machine learning stack, and not have like a mix of like 10 different tools and you don't know what to do with them, but literally integrated into one platform that is one coherent piece of software. Think about like one search engine where you say, I want to have this material with this property, and the whole stack is integrated and cohesive in the way it produces the output. This is where we are getting, so we already have a first version of it running and we are improving it, but this was quite a challenge, how to set such a thing up, because so far from people we have in our team who have decades of industry expertise, it's very difficult to get there. Now to the questions that are a little bit more on the unknown, I think, it's always hard to speculate about things you don't know, of course, but I think, as you already mentioned, Alex, one challenge is, of course, the sim-to-real gap that you have. I mean, people know from IRL, but you also have this here, of course. You do like a nice DFT simulation, but a DFT, for example, simulation is something at 0 Kelvin, which is absolutely non-physical. And then you get one single energy minimum, but it doesn't tell you anything about the dynamics. I mean, in real time, like molecules wiggle around and they do certain things you need to observe and you can't compute. So how do you get there? How do you match this to something like a microstructure where you say you don't look at single atoms, but like many things together forming like complex structures in space? So I know that you, for example, are very much interested in this stuff. And like bridging these gaps. So there are a lot of ideas, there's a lot of very fruitful research going on, but I think it's absolutely not clear what is the succeeding pattern there. Like, you could go from coarse graining to fine graining back and forth. There's ideas to integrate more lab data. There's the idea of like having more adaptive search in the lab and so on. But it's absolutely not clear what is technically and commercially the most viable way to get there.
And that is a great segue into you, Alex. You were a bit mystic when you said that people understand different things or sometimes the wrong things when they think about materials. Can you allude on that?
Yeah,
Take us deeper.
Sure, happy to. I mean, I think there's two components, right? There's like more the business side of things, like what is in the material, and not all materials are equal. Like you have things like concrete, and you have things like super specialty, tiny things in your smartphone that make it work. They have very different kind of economics behind them. And then I think just on the technical side, I think a lot of people think of the material as a zip file, for example, right? Like, it's literally just atoms in the box, right? So, like, we put a iron here, the nickel, and then in this distance there's another atom over there, right? And if you live in this world where we have this Star Trek replicating machine where we can just put the atoms like that, then that's great. We are not quite there yet, so like representation of a material that does assume that is maybe not the best useful representation when it comes to like real industrial R&D. And as Jonas just mentioned, right, like dynamics in particular, right? A lot of the active materials are like very, very high value materials. They are not static, right? So like one of the applications we spend a lot of time on is catalysis. And catalysis, I would say that's for materials discovery maybe one of the harder technical challenges, because you have electrons moving and atoms moving, right? So there's a lot of like movement. You're looking at something like 9 to 12 different orders of magnitude in space and time that you have to bridge, right? Like if you're looking at like what's really happening, some interactions take place in like picoseconds, but then like they also need to be running for months and years in like industrial plants, right? This is complex. It's very complex to model, and how today's humanity is modeling that is taking just a perfect surface and like putting like an observation on it, and then like they calculate an observation energy, and they're saying like, yeah, this is probably going to be a good catalyst. Reality looks different. We have microstructure, we have defects like active sites, like we have dynamics, right? I think one example I like to quote is like, think about one of the biggest inventions of mankind is the Haber-Bosch process, right? 1 out of 2 nitrogen atoms in your proteins, in your DNA, in your body, right? Like they went through this Haber-Bosch process. Like what it does, it takes nitrogen from the air and basically converts it into fertilizer, into food. There were 3 Nobel Prizes awarded for that. The first one was for actually discovering the process, right? The second one was for industrializing it, bringing it into like large-scale production, which was very difficult. And then only 80 years later, we awarded a Nobel Prize to Gerd Vettel, actually in Berlin, for understanding what's actually happening in this reaction, right? Would we have been able to design first principles how this catalyst works? I mean, we didn't. And now, even last year, there was a paper that basically said, oh, actually, this is wrong. The Nobel laureate's work is actually not. Maybe we don't quite understand it as well as they thought. So, what that material then really is, like, it's not one single structure. It's more of I mean, from our perspective, it's actually many different structures that are relevant, and using different learning techniques, we actually learn useful representations from data, from simulations, and then in our case also because we have the kind of privilege to have different data modalities, right, from spectra, from spectroscopy, different fingerprinting tools, characterization. We can take all of different data modalities and try to get a more rich, multimodal representation, essentially, of what a material really is in an operating environment.
So I think, thank you so much. That was super interesting. Also, this example of the 80 years, I think, is is daunting when you think about building a company. Shouldn't take 80 years, hopefully, until things work out. But yeah, sometimes science is slow, and then at some point maybe some explosions happen, and then things go incredibly quick, which is, I think, the point we are at right now. At this crossroads, right?
Just for that, just to make clear that like it didn't take BASF 8 years to make money with that. No, they had a monopoly like long before. So. And
monopolies are great, right? I think so I'm an engineer by heart, so I started software companies very early on in my youth, but still I then went for economics and lots of statistics and numbers in my studies. And it always hurts me to say, because as an economist you say like monopolies are bad, but as a founder or entrepreneur, I think monopolies are pretty awesome when they help you to build a very profitable business. That's just a quick side note. I love the specificity you all went into. So let's stay there a bit and let's try to create some still generalizable learnings for the audience here on this question. So scientific discovery is hard in itself, but then bringing it to the real world is even harder and strained with lots of difficult tasks. Tell me, and the question goes to everybody, tell me, what was something that super significantly accelerated this process in your own experience that was quite unexpected for you at first, but then really changed the game, and maybe also tell us a bit how you actually discovered it. Who wants to start?
Think about this question.
Okay, we can also have a speaking time. So it really is about something that was quite unexpected first, but then, as usual in science, when you understand it, like, oh yeah, sure, it's a ton of sense. If I had known that earlier, it could have saved me months. Good that I know it now. Maybe that's something valuable to share with people working the same.
I mean, I can talk. I'm just thinking about what I can talk about.
Of course, not violating any NDAs or.
Yeah, so like, I
secrecies.
mean, what's in the open is, for example, our collaboration with Meta and the ODAC, like this open DAC, like direct air capture plans, where you want to create certain class of materials called metal organic frameworks. You can think of little atomistic sponges that are able to capture CO2 from the air. That's basically the idea, to get like CO2 capturing plants running this in a continuous process in the future. So this is one of the materials we are focusing at the moment. And what I learned there a lot, and I found very interesting, is that I entered Cusp with the feeling of you have to be super accurate, you have to make basically these two levels of precision on scale for a lot of different material classes and so on. And I thought this is such a hard task, but well, let's try. And what I learned in the process, also like collaborating, as I said before, like with experts in the respective fields, is it's not necessarily important to have always the best model. Sometimes a cheap model is great if it gets you like a very good indicator of what to explore next. So it's often much more important to understand what to compute and what to shortcut at certain levels, and then basically guesstimate what to compute next. Because in the end, it doesn't matter so much whether you're super precise if you throw away 99.999 of your candidates away because they're not suitable. What you actually care about are the very few examples in the end that you want to send to a lab, that you want to synthesize, that you want to experimentally validate. It costs you like a lot of money. And there you just want to increase the likelihood of success. And I think this really changes the perspective a little bit, because then it means like it's not necessarily always important to be the most accurate or the most scientifically valid or whatever. It's just really about what is the most clever shortcut, and sometimes it's just really founded in physics because someone comes up with like, oh, we could also just compute this property, and this is kind of a very good proxy. And this can accelerate your research pipeline tremendously in the end, even though you did not invent the next fancy algorithm or did not unlock the great data pool, the next foundation model or whatever. So I think this is, at least for me, was a big learning and very interesting. And I also see like the biggest opportunities in really trying to bring these things together.
And would you say that it's a bit counterintuitive because it's basically the opposite of writing a paper?
Yes and no. I think like it depends on who you ask. If you are more on this accurate computational chemistry physics world, where I basically did my PhD on and so on, then it's more counterintuitive, I'd say, because there people are much more chasing, I have a little bit better functional than you have, or like, I don't know, I get this number a little bit better than you. And people don't think so much about systems. And as I said before, the grand challenge that we look at Cusp is basically building this platform that really does a whole system, integrating all the stacks end to end. And there, all the little parts are not so important as is basically the interaction between all of them and bringing this together into a discovery process. And this actually unlocks then speeds in the discovery process that, yeah, if you look at the individual papers, they claim my method does it because of that and that, but usually they always cut out the cookie cutter like a little confined space in which they are comfortable and ignore all the rest. But if you go in the real discovery pipeline, you can't do this. So you really have to think about it at the end and then, yeah.
Thank you. I think this sort of idea of less is more also when it comes to machine learning models. Like we've been playing around, and I think Sebastian's going to talk about this next week, I think, at the Merantix AI, with a concept bottleneck model to have a bit more like an explainable, basically explainable layer in our LLM predictions for bias and protein designs, and the initial results look very, very promising, even on a tiny model. And I think this was kind of surprising, and I think it's sort of also this sometimes taking a step back and thinking carefully about what are your inputs, what are your outputs, how do you extract information from the thing that you're predicting can get you much further. And I think that's sort of a little bit echoes what you also just said.
I mean, maybe just a quick reaction to that. Yes, I agree. I think like having a well-posed problem is like, you know, the biggest part of the solution, right? If you have any problem, it makes a lot of sense to think a lot about the problem, and then the solution is actually relatively easy once you really have understood that. Having said that, maybe it's my small disagree there. I think more is more sometimes. And I think like one of the big challenges, right, is like if that testing is so expensive, right, like, we have to like make that cheaper, right? Like, we have to like be able to just test more, like be able to like, we are currently still a few orders of magnitude away when it comes to probably building these more sophisticated modern AI approaches to really like get them useful in this material domain. And we have to bring down this cost of testing hypotheses, right? Now we can use AI to generate infinite hypotheses, but this cost of testing them is just like too damn high. So like more is more. Once you've thought about like what is actually making that so expensive and like you have figured it out, I think then we're into it. And then, going back to your question there, I think two things came to mind. I mean, the first one is more like, we build obviously something in the physical world where like we have these automated setups, and I don't think there's a single answer to like, could we have anticipated something? Was there something we didn't know? And like, it's just impossible. I think you sometimes you just have to do it and you have to learn from it. And the data quality itself, right? Like once you deal with real world data, like the world becomes a lot more messy. And figuring out how to actually generate large, at scale data that's really high quality, that's like very diverse, unbiased, it's flexible, and that's really reproducible, that's not trivial. And like we face so many problems to actually get that to work. And yeah, it's not super surprising, like what are these like hidden variables that we're not thinking of that actually have a massive impact on your performance, right? And, you think you've controlled everything, and then it's this like, we've been moving the lab, and then suddenly something like nothing works, and like, well, why? And it just has like 2 months to figure it out. There's no way though you can anticipate that. Like this just happens when you start building it, and I think like that over time, I think actually helps you really, making this deep system integration, actually talking, these different aspects of the platform talking to each other. I think that's really difficult, but also very valuable if it then allows you to have orders of magnitude lower costs when it comes to testing hypotheses, right? That's sort of an advantage you get. The second example that came to mind was, it doesn't quite fit the bill, but essentially the very first version of our platform, my co-founder designed over Christmas, I think in like 3-4 years ago. And we never built that one actually, so like, that was a good learning, I think, a quick learning, right? Because like we thought, okay, again, we want lots of data, we want to have it fast, and the very first thing we did actually was just showing that to potential customers, potential partners, right? And after visiting a lot of manufacturing sites, like traveling a few different countries, looking at some factories, we got a lot of feedback, and like they very politely said like, oh, what you designed there is cute, but like it's super academic, it doesn't really matter. So I think taking in those learnings very early on, right? We were not in love with our technology. We just like wanted to build something that actually works, and then we want to get a product into the world. I think that's something I guess you can't anticipate per se, but you can learn quickly, right? So if you just sort of de-risk, go straight to it, like where you have to go, which in our case then is manufacturing. You can get those learnings, and then you basically completely scratched everything we ever built or designed, and then build it back based on all of the learnings we took from there.
Actually, when I listen to all of you, there seems to be a lot about this systemic thinking, the end-to-end thinking, but then also the tinkering and finding mistakes and fail early to actually then get to the result. So maybe we come back to this a bit more woolly topic of culture again. How do you incorporate this type of thinking in your organization? How do you encourage it? And how do you encourage it in a culture where, in the science world, looking bad isn't a cool thing? And actually, you want people not to be afraid of that, and to admit it early also if they've been wrong, right? Because otherwise you're going down the rabbit hole and just trying to, shield that that's not working out. How do you encourage this type of behavior and thinking in an organization in a also kind of scalable way? What are your learnings?
From us, really, it's like a part of the culture, right? So we have 3 different cultural values. One of them is actually break barriers, redefine boundaries, right? That's sort of, if we do the same thing as everybody else, like we're bound to fail, right? Like it's never going to work. So we really have, as a startup, find the shortcuts, like be creative about like problem solving, and cheat in a way. how the gene codes, like what are those, right? And like we're really trying to make that part of it. I think in practice we do a few random things, like we have Freaky Fridays, right? Like, we're still hoping that one day we'll get a Nobel Prize from one of the random things we do on Friday afternoons. Who knows? It works for some people, might work for us. And then I think like allowing each other to make mistakes was like one of the learnings we had to do, right? So I think like we all took this very close to heart, right? Like, one shot, like with one shot, we can't waste it. We have to make this work. We cannot fail. But then if you are constantly in that mindset, you can't really learn, right? Like you're really like then just like playing it safe and do the thing that you know because anything else outside is uncomfortable. And you can't take as many risks because you can't afford to fail. And I think like then really just allowing each other to sort of embrace the imperfections, kind of nurture the understanding of like, how we can make this work together, allowing each other getting into a space to make mistakes was super, super important. I think it took us, probably a year to realize how stressed we were because we were trying to make it work. And then I think since then, like, we've really just made it part of the culture. We talk a lot about our sort of fuck-ups, so to say, that are happening. And give space, I think, to make those mistakes and encourage people because there's a lot of regrets we have is like from playing it too safe and like kind of staying within the bounds of what we knew and were comfortable with, which I didn't actually solve the problem, right? So like that was the thing that I regret the most in the company history is just like when we were not getting the right help at the right time to solve the problem that was real, and instead defaulted back to what felt more comfortable.
Yeah, I think in Cusp we have a lot of similar ideas. So I think at the core is that, I feel like within Cusp, everyone is just really compassionate about seeing the other people thrive. And it's like really in a very realistic sense, not only saying, oh, I want this person to be useful for my project, but it really like, oh, I'm really happy that my colleague is so excited about like this new thing and I want to help them and vice versa. The second part is, we are a lot of individuals and everyone has their own individual traits, and it's very important to just embrace this and take this very the highest priority. But also we are working on this common goal, and in this common goal, I think we have a lot of people who joined quite senior, working at DeepMind before, for example, where I think we are always in this very big research projects which take time over a year, and there's no rapid progress, but it's really like incrementally building step by step. So when I worked in the AlphaFold team, I was like this, like you really have this small ablations that are tested, and incrementally over time you get something great, transcends everything that was there before. But it's never like just one idea that you try and that works instantly. But it's really this incremental progress, and then building this at the heart. So I feel like it's this culture of, as I said, compassion and like just making everyone thrive, and sometimes people have weekdays or weeks, doesn't matter. But working together on this one grand goal and incrementally improving it by just testing things. And so there's a lot of freedom in letting people try out what to improve there, for example. And sometimes it's a dead end, but sometimes it's this great innovation that brings a little bit in the equation. And I think this is integrating this over time. This is what makes something like a big project, in our case, the platform that we're building, great. It's not the clever ideas, it's not the 80 hours in a week that some 10x engineer grinds or whatever. I think this is just fake. It's much more about embracing this idea of continuous improvement, and like I like this concept of anti-fragility from Nassim Taleb, like just having something that is robustly over time by basically failing here and there without catastrophically failing and getting more robust over time. I think this is, I guess, our mode of operation here.
Yeah, I think it's the same for us. It's really like there's recognition that there's no single individual that drives anything, but it's like this collection of ideas that you have in the same room, and ideally also coming from many different backgrounds, right? The biologists will have very different ideas than the machine learning scientists, or the engineers, and sort of bringing everyone together and giving them the space to then develop these ideas into products.
Before we open the floor, I would like each of you to leave the audience with some unconventional thinking of what's going to happen in the future. What is the breakthrough you're expecting? It doesn't need to be in your domain or space exactly, but what is a what is a breakthrough that you're expecting, and you think too little people are yet thinking about it or aware of it. And maybe during that time also the audience can start thinking about their questions. We're going to open the mic.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I might have spent too much time this year in San Francisco, but like I think speed of progress is a really interesting thing. I think exponential. Speed of progress is an interesting concept, right? So timing, getting timing right is very hard, but I know if we are on an S-curve somewhere, I think like, I do think we are relatively early still. I haven't yet seen any big material breakthrough that really like makes a lot of money in the real world. I think we are not there yet. But I think a lot of this foundation right now, like there have been like genius people working for a really long time, building a lot of this foundation. And in fact, we already see like things like AlphaFold and winning a Nobel Prize. It is sometimes a bit scary to think about like, okay, if we are actually now managing to solve some of these outstanding problems, the simulation to reality gap, like I think we might underestimate like where we could be. I don't know if it's happening in the next like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but I think like it's not infinitely away. I think it's like how much dedicated effort, how much campaigns can we put against these targets. And I think once we manage to repeatedly really discover materials with properties, I mean, we're not that far away anymore from the Star Trek future. So I think it's exciting. I think there's like a big chance for utopia there. Also, like there's dystopia, like we don't want that. But I think that is something that people still underestimate. Like if we're really in a sort of learning curve environment right here where this could take off.
Yeah, adding to that, also maybe referring earlier where you said like the big challenges also bring down the costs in the lab, for example. And I totally agree with you. And I'm just saying it's complementary in the end. Like you need both, I guess. You want to not blind screen all materials. You want to figure out what to screen, and then this makes us very deep. And basically going back and forth. And this is iterating what you're saying. I think right now we are in a world where we have a lot of data just dispersed over extremely many different fields and modalities. Where you can say we have like a gargantuan ocean made of little ponds, and they're all connected. And the problem is that if you talk to any material scientist or any biologist or whatever in a specific field, and they will say, this is a really cool thing, we just don't have the data. You could say AlphaFold was so successful because they have the PDB, which is I think was estimated to $50 to $100 billion to build this from scratch. So that even a gigascaler wouldn't build this data set, right? So this is like one unique thing where people threw together 50 years of data. And in other fields, especially materials, you don't have this. You have a lot of data, but it's just scattered all over the world. And I think 10 years ago, no one would have had an idea how do you bring this together. Like, there's no way, because it's just so different. I think now with foundation models and what we're touching here, we are now, I think we have on the horizon something where we could end up with some coherent view on this gargantuan data that we have, which is just scattered in all different places, and make it useful for applications. And this is already something, I'd say 5 years ago, no one would have dreamed of. And we are at the point where I'd say this will come. This is just a matter of time. And once you're there, then we go to this point where we can say we can really integrate insight from synthesis, for example, from a very different field into measurement data from a very different other field, and use this, for example, to say, hey, your automated lab should really look into this part. And at this point, I think we will reach escape velocity.
Maybe one could say we're at the cusp of a Cambrium explosion will change the world. Sorry.
No, but it's interesting. We had a conversation this morning about this data gap, and we were talking about single-cell transcriptomic data, which is really useful for pharma companies, for example, to understand how their compound will have an effect on not just one cell type, but all the cell types that are in the body. So it's really powerful for drug discovery. And basically, the pharma companies threw their data sets together in order to be able to train this big model, which it's almost like a political effort. That it takes some coordination between us to be able to actually make this work.
I'm not going to talk about my prediction, but I'm going to talk about one question I continuously keep asking myself. Looking out in the world and seeing rare earth materials being weaponized for geopolitics, and I'm constantly asking myself, okay, when are we going there to discover and build novel types of materials with similar attributes that could just kill this dependency on rare earth minerals, which are actually not that rare, but just their process of refining them and getting them out is so dirty that not many countries want to engage in it. So I keep thinking that if we could start building these in an artificial way without this terrible dirty processing and refining, then we would be in a very different place very, very soon. With that, I'd like to open the stage, and I'm going to pass the mic.
Almost. Great. A good place. So, general question. It seems that all of you have a different background than IT or AI, right? Theoretical physics, and I think...
I have a machine learning. I'm just a machine learner.
Okay, that was my question. First of all, are you using existing models for your task and just actually just tuning them to the task they have to do with you? Or are you actually trying to develop your own models?
Both. Well, we are doing both.
Okay, and how is it like AI focus or material science or biological chemistry science? How is this balance there? 50-50 depends like from your effort of workforce and also from the people that work for you.
I think we're heavily on the biology side at the moment, just because we work with very large molecules that are much more expensive to model in a physics kind of framework.
Okay, just the next one.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for all the panelists. And it's really difficult to narrow down to one question. I'm sorry, my question goes not to the biology because I'm really out there. But in terms of testing materials for catalysis, right? Especially like, I don't know, you were mostly working with electrocatalysis or also heterogeneous catalysis. But the point is, having worked in that field, I know like synthesis is a problem, material testing is a problem, and then training a model on your test material is also a problem because there's not so many data variety, right? So my question really goes to what is your scale of testing? And do you outsource any of your testing? Because testing heterogeneous catalysis for a specific reaction is actually a complex task.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think something maybe some people have forgotten is this is not the first time people have been dreaming of like materials discovery, right? Like this is probably an age-old dream, right? But I think there was a wave of companies that was essentially trying to use high-throughput experimentation, like late 90s, early 2000s. And they kind of ran into exactly those problems, right? Like one of the catalysis as a domain, as an application domain, was one of the areas where high-throughput experimentation had probably the biggest impact. Like there's literal catalysts that came out of that. They were commercialized by GE or polycarbonate or Dow, Exxon, everybody, BASF, Shell. They've all been adopting high-throughput experimentation because it basically helped you. I mean, trying to brute force, let's say, this infinite chemical universe, right? That was doomed to fail, but it was still economically valuable. The big learning from there was if you work on catalysis, is one, testing is hard, right? So people have been trying to use tiny dots on a wafer, generating a lot of data, which then turned out to be rather useless when you try to bring that into like a real-world industrial environment. So if you're like looking at chemical engineering, big plants, right, like your fixed back reactors or trickle flow or whatever, there's certain types of reactor systems, and these tiny dots in the wafer that generate a lot of data are not actually that useful at telling you what works in this more industrial environment. So in that sense, like the learning is, it makes sense to trade off some throughput to have better information, like deeper information, more relevant information for like a given application. So for heterogeneous catalysis, if you are testing on like milligrams or hundreds of milligrams gram scale, you are able to, when it comes to refinery catalysts, actually to shoot directly straight to how this actually works in the plant. Right? Like, we have benchmark catalyst systems that, like HDE, for example, is one of the leading companies. You seem to not. I mean,
but I've worked like not directly, but like I work at BASF, so
Alright, okay, perfect. I mean, yeah, then maybe you do know, like, Jaqueline, the founder of HP, actually just joined Dunia, so like, that's super exciting. But basically, yeah, I mean, it makes a difference, right? So like, testing is super important, and then the other thing, when it comes to synthesis, I mean, you know, Dirk, HP, BSF person, once told me, like, it makes a difference if you turn it clockwise or anti-clockwise, right? Like, if you're starting clockwise, like, that can have an impact. I mean, that was a bit of a joke, right? But like, that can have an impact whether or not your campus actually works, right? So this is how finicky it is. So this is going back to what I said earlier about you need to have this full traceability, not just of what this material is supposed to look like, but like really how it has been manufactured, how it's been made. And I guess sort of this is like data we collect in our labs, and like we really end-to-end sort of say that the synthesis, like the impregnation, and then like really the testing, in our case electrocatalysis at device level, thermocatalysis, so work with different companies that have like more industrial relevant equipment testing.
Hey, thanks a lot.
There's another one there,
Yeah.
just after, right?
Okay, yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. I have a question here. You talk about your shortage in the data, of course, and I can imagine that if you want to just generate your data using, for example, simulation, it would be really expensive, considering that usually it should be in the quantum level of, for example, minimizing energy. It's so expensive, I definitely know it. On the other hand, you are talking about the design of the new material. So if you are talking about the design, it's not just about, for example, science or, for example, AI. It's even art. It's some kind of creativity here. So what's the working flow here for the design? Do you just talk about the AI such as the LLM model? Of course not. But if you want, for example, go through the physics-informed models, it cannot design, it cannot, you know. And I'm not talking about your specific domain, I'm talking about the design using the AI. So would you please give me some hints here?
I mean, try to think about what I can say without saying too much about the internal stuff, of course. I mean, generally I'd say in the first order approximation, you can think about using a generative model, producing a lot of noisy candidates, and then filtering it down. So this, I'd say, this is more the classic high throughput screening approach that you also do in drug discovery in these kind of fields. And there, it's kind of obvious what you would do. You basically have a generative model which is based on, say, some domain constraints, based on some data that you have and so on, that produces like a lot of candidates, and then you need like all sorts of from coarse to fine screening methods to filter them down, and all the information you collect in the way you can then you reuse to basically improve this methodology of filtering, right? So this is like some first order approximation. The second order approximation, and this is I guess the interesting thing now with agentic AI, even though I still don't know what an agent means, but like what people talk about this, is that the whole thing can become a feedback loop where all the information can be used to actually guide the next step again, right? So you can basically say the step to decide which tool to use for the next screening step can then be informed on a context level. And this whole information can then go back to the generator itself, which then becomes much more of a designer. So, and if you think about such feedback loops, and then also maybe have some side information saying like you're a chemist, you have a certain idea of what you want to have, certain properties what you want to have, and you can formulate this, for example, in natural language, and bring this also into this whole machinery. Then we're talking. Then it becomes much more than the simple, I don't know, funnel where you just throw in some stuff in and you just see what drops out, but literally something where you steer the funnel into the direction of what you want to have. And with every time you run it through and you get signal, it gets better.
Yeah. Great. Maybe for route optimization, we go to Sebastian first, and then we go over to you, okay?
Yeah, so I have one question that brought me actually here. So everyone maybe except Jackie. So if you put yourself like 5 years back or something like that, and talking about material discovery and material design, what has all the development in AI technology now made possible that you couldn't have done before? That's basically the question.
Yeah, so, I think a lot. I mean, 2020, so 5 years ago, I was already working, I guess, on materials discovery, molecular discovery. It was part of the DARPA project for accelerated molecular discovery. we tried to do, like in this DARPA project, right, like AMD program, we tried to do NLP, right? So like we tried to do, like there was like 3 different pillars, like some was property prediction, some was, you know, sort of with lab in the loop, kind of validation, all of that, right? Like same ideas. And I remember like one of them, I don't know if I'm actually allowed to say that, also short, NLP was nested back then. So like, you know, a lot of the text mining and a lot of the kind of, now I think like agentic workflows is connective tissue that AI can now provide. I think simply was not really working. And I think like I personally have been, it took me a very long time because I saw all of that and I was rather negatively biased towards a lot of these LLMs, like when they first kind of sort of made an appearance. I've come full, I went full 180 on that. I think they actually super, no, right? Yeah. So, initially I thought they don't work because it didn't work when I first started using them, but like now they actually do a lot of very useful stuff that like I guess they couldn't 5 years ago. So I think like connective tissue is maybe one of them, sort of like a lot of these kind of tasks in between your workflows. I think that's really what it's able to do, and a lot of like working with, literature databases can also be our own proprietary data sets, right? And we have a lot of databases and knowledge graphs, so to say, like actually having that as context then is super, super interesting, and they get better and better. The speed of progress, honestly, has been, for me, super surprising. Or like, I wouldn't have believed that. Other than that, I mean, like when it comes to, you know, the hardware side of things, like these self-driving labs, autonomous labs, right? Like they were in their infancy, like this as a concept. The materials acceleration platform was defined in 2017, right? So 2020, everybody was excited about it, but nobody had seen it. 2023, like I think, late 2023, there was like a Financial Times article. Suddenly the world realized this thing is actually something that exists, but a lot of it is academic and hacky, right? Like, you know, you have an oven, and like an oven doesn't usually come with a Python API, so, right, like, you know, it's not that easy. Unless you do have an oven with a Python API, which we have. But that's not super straightforward, right? So like getting that now to scalability and like making them work, that was ugly 5 years ago. Now, again, also speed of progress there and like the sophistication of the supply chain that we have now, I think it's completely different.
Yeah, maybe add to that from the computational side also, I think we're now at a stage where these machine learning force fields that exist are becoming much more of a commodity in a good sense. Like, I don't know, Microsoft had a medicine and they didn't publish the full weights, for example, but then, for example, Meta published a Suma model, which then was open source. So I feel like there's a race to the bottom, similar happening as with LLMs, because big labs, big companies and so on, they want to be the best. And I feel like the scientific community, also like smaller startups who don't want to train foundation methods on their own, for example, they benefit a lot from that. Because now you get a model, I mean, it's not DFT level, I would be very careful with that, but it's much better than the hacky, Amber, whatever force fields people used years ago, which was basically the only thing you could do. And then, of course, this is a huge discrepancy, where it's like, I don't know, like if you compute certain properties, some double dynamic properties, you can actually run a thermodynamic simulation with a machine learning force field. And it's not terrible. It's like giving you insightful properties, maybe not good enough for direct synthesis, but like at least screening candidates that you can then send to direct synthesis to actually see whether they're real. Let's say this thing 5 years ago, I mean, I think Maze is not, it's amazing. Maybe Maze is around 5 years ago, and this was not even a transferable Maze version. And before that, there was like not really any model that was good enough for anything, I'd say.
Can I just ask, like, on what scale do these models work okay? What would you say?
I mean, this depends, like they're more accurate. I would say, to quote my PhD supervisor, there's this golden triangle between, let's say, fidelity, like how good is accurate is the model, how fast does it run, like especially if you look at throughput, and then how universal it is. And I'd say, this so far still holds true. Like if you want to have a model that's really accurate and really precise, right, then it also has to span all of molecular space, and it's almost surely like a gargantuan model that will never be fast enough for simulation. If you have a model that is both accurate and fast, it's likely very domain specific, and you're like in this realm of classic force fields. And then of course you can always get cheap models that are fast and universal but not good.
Just like one comment. I mean, 100% agree. Like one fun fact, right? You know, I think like Maze, before Maze we had Schnet, right? And that was actually in Berlin.
I know,
this is not, let's just give a credit to.
It's just like, there was no, there was not so much scientific.
100%. And the point being sort of like, what's been possible in the last 5 years is one thing, but like if you look at these learning curves, like what's possible in the next 2 years is like the thing that's super exciting, right? Like, I think these force fields, currently, I still think they're, when we started doing it, let's say it that way, we tried them, we tried to fine-tune them on our domains. They were, I mean, by default they were meh. When we fine-tuned them, they were a bit better, but like still meh. We had to revisit a bit our strategy there because like the progression of this like has been so fast. Like like we don't even know if like fine-tuning really makes a big difference because like every few months there's a new model anyway. So I think that's one of the most exciting things. Like I think we're still not there yet because there's dynamics missing and all of that. But like now also 2025 we have UMA, right? I think that's a super. I mean, I'm curious actually your take, but like I think it's actually it's again surprisingly good, better than expected. So what will be possible with this current momentum behind it? I'm super interested to see where this will be in 2 years' time.
Maybe since you excluded Jackie, I can still say something about Cambrium, because as some of you might know, Cambrium originated in our studio, in our verge studio, and we were the first investors in Cambrium, and have supported the company all the way through up till this point, and are very excited about them. One thing that was a bit counterintuitive, when Cambrium was starting to work with this big audacious mission of being like a massive discovery platform for materials and going into all these spaces where coming up with biological materials would also have a tremendous impact on the environment and the world we live in. And counterintuitively, we started to work on cosmetics, right? Like, oh, you're building this massive impact company and now you're going after cosmetics, like, blah. The reasoning behind, I just wanted to share because it's a bit a way of thinking that I actually like. So building Cambrium over time will require and has required massive investment. How to win over investors to make them feel comfortable with going after these audacious goals is showing that the stuff you do actually works. And there's even people who are willing to pay for it, right? And so we found cosmetics an interesting space because it was ripe for disruption, and at the same time also there was a lot of openness in the cosmetics field industry to work with a new small-ish startup, and the customer of this like little company from Berlin, despite them not being around for 80 years like BASF. So that was one of the reasons why we went into this space and said, okay, commercialization in that industry is probably going quicker than in others. So we won't end there, but for us to start there and show that things we do actually work, we can build this company up, is a big lever. So we're gonna move over to you. Last question. I'm sorry that we wanna leave you with breakfast and getting to know each other.
Sure, no worries, thanks. My question is a bit more generic. Will Europe's competitiveness and success depend on how quickly in Europe we merge AI with material science? And I'm not talking only about perhaps owning the data and models and patterns that underpin those, but are there any success criteria that you can think of and share with us? Thank you.
I think internally our success criteria is always we want to have a real material out of the world that impacts humanity in a positive way. So this is our core goal. So to quote our CEO, he tends to say like climate change by 2050 will affect 3.5 billion people in a negative way. And at Cusp we want to put at the core of our mission to basically affect 3.5 billion people in a positive way with materials we develop at it. But this also means these must be materials. This doesn't need to be like something like an API or software as a service or like an exploitation model. It's literally, let's say, direct air capture, literally something that can be deployed and gets carbon out of in gigaton scale. And I feel, that's what we define as success criteria. And everything that helps us to get there is a viable path. So this is how I think, right? So I wouldn't settle the horse from the wrong end, like say, well, we have to think about the data, we have to think about the models, we have to think about the data center ownership and so on. This is all just means to get to the goal. The goal is we want to have certain materials, like the other open partnership that we have right now with this water filtration, where it's about getting these PFAS out of our drinking water. We want to be at a point where this actually happens. because we need a real material. And whatever we can get to get there, and we believe that AI is a crucial part here, we'll use.
Yeah, I would say the same goes for, we really work on a new means of production, right? We want to use cells to produce things, and I think this has many implications in terms of like food security, being a little bit more independent of natural resources because you're more flexible with what you can get out. You can get the microbes to produce the resource for you. And I think ultimately we believe that this is a technology that's important to have in the long run to be able to produce what we need as humanity in the most ecologically sound and efficient way. And in the end, we're also producing value-added materials. Right? So that's also important, like producing things that serve us for the time that we need them to be on this planet, but don't stick around for the next 1,000 years.
Yeah, super good question. I think you mentioned Europe as a geography, right? So, it's interesting to think about it from that perspective. The White House is currently putting together an AI for science strategy, right? The European Commission is working on it as well. China already in March made AI for science a national priority topic, right? So like it is happening, right? It will be happening. There's plenty of people around the world that kind of understand what needs to happen next. And personal opinion, right? Like if Europe will ever have a $1 trillion company, I think it will probably be one in physical AI. If we're talking about physical AI, I think that materials is one of the big industries where there's like a good opportunity for that. So if that's ever going to happen, I think this is like one of the spaces I think Europe should prioritize.
Also, it's one of the unique advantages that we still have. That there is just a lot of talent and background here.
100%. I think biotech, physical AI, I think that's really, and this stuff also Germany is just good at. Like this kind of like little engineering problems, like anywhere Rhine Valley from Switzerland go to the Netherlands, like there's plenty of these companies that have these problems, that have this machinery, that have the know-how to build that and scale it globally and actually affect, for the world, actually solve some big problems, and I think that's what Europe can really do. I think the two things that it does take at this stage, right, like knowing if you have thought about the problem well, if you know what you're doing, if you've de-risked what you can de-risk, I think like scale and like velocity, learning velocity, I think that's the two things you do. I think like it would be frustrating to say the least if we don't go for it.
That is a wonderful finish, and let's hope these 3 trillion euro companies are actually sitting here. Thank you so much.